Hi everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Lysha and I am the owner of Lysha Be Creative. Today we're doing a video that is on this sort of like leopard themed galaxy tumbler, and I've done something similar, but this is actually straight out of one of my members of my Facebook group came up with this amazing inspiration idea, and I decided to see this through. So we're going to take a little bit of a ride, if you will, into the video from my Facebook group, and I'm going to walk you along, obviously, step by step. And of course, any of the products that I use today will be both listed and linked down in the description box in case you'd like to recreate this yourself. So let's go ahead and jump right into today's video. All right, so we're starting with this already sort of galaxy themed leopard print design that I picked up from Vinyl Cottage several years ago. So I've really been hanging on to this vinyl, and when my group member Felicia came up with the inspiration for this, I immediately, after kind of thinking about all the colors that she had kind of mentioned, I immediately remembered that I had this vinyl pattern in my collection. So all I'm doing now is, of course, just trimming up the edges, removing all the white edged border there, and then I am going to cut this so that it better fits around the cup I'm using. So the cup I'm using today is a 20-ounce skinny straight from Maker Flow Crafts, and so that is the cup that we're going to be using today to get this design all put together. So after I've gotten the edges trimmed, I'm now going to just put this on my cup as sort of a template to see how much of the vinyl I'm going to need. That way I can save whatever I have left for future projects. So I'm just going to kind of wrap it around just to kind of determine how much of the vinyl that I want. So I'm going to cut the section that I want, and then I'm going to wrap this around the cup. So for this design, you don't necessarily need an entire full wrap of vinyl, but in order for me to kind of work through this, and again, I'm doing this directly in my Facebook group, in order for me to work through this, it was important for me to be able to wrap the whole cup and then kind of choose which section of the leopard print I wanted to be exposed. So most of this, which is covered, is going to be covered with glitter and paint anyway, but I wanted to make sure that I could pick out a section that I wanted to keep, and so I didn't have to kind of figure it out with the cutting portion. I decided to just do mostly a full wrap, and that way I could kind of just map out what section I was going to keep afterward. So you'll notice that this isn't going to fully wrap around the cup, but of course that's not going to matter for this design because the majority of this design is going to be covered with our various spray paint colors and all the glitter. We're only going to have a very small, like 2-inch section that's going to be exposed of this vinyl underneath, okay? So it's almost kind of like a peekaboo, but not, if that makes sense. So I'm just going to apply that sheet of vinyl to my tumbler using my squeegee and my hands to get that wrapped all the way around. Again, it doesn't even really matter if it goes on crooked. So this is one of those designs where for the base bottom layer, when you're applying your vinyl, you can kind of put this on however you feel like putting it on. It really isn't going to matter if it's straight or if it lines up because most of this vinyl is not going to be exposed in the final design. So I'm just going to trim up the top edge, and then I'm also going to trim off the bottom edge here. I'm not using any sort of guideline whatsoever. As far as you guys know, I've used like the blue painter's tape method where you just wrap it around the bottom and drag your knife. But because I know that the majority of this is going to be glitter, it doesn't matter if this line down here is straight or not because it's all going to be covered with glitter and spray paint anyway. So now that I have that all applied, I've made sure I don't have any bubbles. We're now going to take our 1-inch painter's tape, and we are going to kind of map out which section of the Galaxy Leopard vinyl that we want to keep on the tumbler, okay? So I'm going to put like 3 to 4 lines of blue painter's tape on this cup in a swirl pattern, keeping the section of vinyl that I want exposed. So I really decided that based on the colors that were chosen from Felicia when she mentioned this sort of design idea inspiration that she had, I want to make sure that I'm staying true to that color palette. So I'm avoiding any sections that are green and orange and trying to stay to the blues, the purples, the deep teals, and keep those portions exposed on my cup, okay? So I'm going to just trim the bottom edge, anything that goes over that bottom portion of vinyl. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a pen, and what I'm doing is I'm creating a very jagged, like wiggly, squiggly line along my blue painter's tape. The reason why I'm doing this is because if I were to go and spray paint and apply my glitter now, when I remove this tape, I'd have very harsh lines that would separate my vinyl from my glitter. I don't want that. I want my design and how it all kind of comes together, I want it to look like it was intentional, which of course it is, but I want it to look like the leopard print was something I almost painted on, if that makes sense. So by creating like this very squiggly, very jagged edge line, it kind of just gets the point across that I'm trying to get everything to sort of blend together in one cohesive look. So after I've done my tape or my lines with my pen, I'm going to follow that with my craft knife to be able to remove or to cut into that line that I made and then remove all of that outside tape. So at this point here, you can do one of two things. You can remove the tape and then just trust the process and do your glitter and paint over top. I decided to keep the tape on my cup and then do my spray painting next. So I have a few colors we're going to use today. And I'm going to be doing like a Milky Way swirl type design on this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this to go spray paint. I'm going to start with Hello Handsome and Center Stage from Color Shop and get those as my base colors. Then I'm going to go back with Aromatherapy and Island Girl, and then do a couple spritzes of like a gray spray paint in order for me to get this swirl, okay? So my teal and my purple and my gray, they're all kind of accent colors, whereas my dark blue or deep blue and purple are my main colors. Now I've just mixed up a little bit of epoxy, about 5 ml here, and we're going to do the epoxy method glitter application for this tumbler. So after I've mixed up equal parts of my epoxy, I am using Chaos Resin Liquidy Split, so my fast set. So I do have to work quick, but I don't have to work that quick, if that makes sense. But I have used that, and I'm just going to make sure that I get a really nice coverage of the epoxy all the way up and down this cup. I'm trying to avoid most of the tape section, but of course I do want to make sure I get that epoxy all the way up to the edges of that tape line there to make sure that we can blend this through and through. That way that vinyl can kind of just be exposed afterward. So the first color that I'm going in with is Night Sky. So this is a square cut glitter from my Aisha Creations. We're going to be doing sort of like we're doing a Milky Way swirl, but we're doing this in the same way that I would approach an ombre tumbler, which is to have various cuts and various cuts of the same colors and trying to blend these colors together so that it doesn't look like we have super harsh lines that differentiate each glitter from the next. After I've gone in with Night Sky, I'm going in with Mermazing, which is a beautiful teal to purple color shifting glitter from my Aisha Creations. And that is going to go over my Center Stage glitter color. And that is kind of be the star of the show. So this center section here really is going to match what is underneath on the vinyl. Now I'm going in with Thick Tiff. And that is kind of be my teal glitter that we're using today. And what I'm doing here as I'm kind of putting the colors on is all I'm doing is creating sort of like the base, if you will. So I'm not doing full coverage. I'm just kind of very lightly sprinkling in all the different colored sections and putting a base down for where all my glitter is eventually going to fall. I'm now going in with Grapeful. This is from my Aisha Creations as well. Going over that aromatherapy section there. I ended up backtracking here and going in with Unicorn Dreams from my Aisha Creations and putting that over the purple section as well. I needed something chunkier than Grapeful, so I laid Grapeful down first, then decided to grab Unicorn Sneeze to really bring out the lavender aromatherapy color underneath. So now we have Talking to the Moon. So Talking to the Moon has like little stars and is a holographic silver color. And so I didn't want this to kind of overtake the cup, but I wanted it to be present. So I've just poured a little bit of that on my paper there, and I'm just taking my fingers and just sprinkling that in. So this is another way that you can kind of approach these kind of swirls is if you're not sure that you'd be able to control the amount of glitter that you're getting onto your cup, try just pouring it onto your paper and then kind of sprinkling it with your fingers from there. Going back over my Mermazing section, this is Ariella, and this is from 4K Glitter, which is Vinyl Gallery's glitter line. So I will list that down in the description box as well. And I'm just kind of going over my sections now. So now we're getting into the finer cuts of color here that are matching the base colors that we already put on the cup. Once I finish with Ariella and I've gotten a nice blend and base there, I'm going to go in with Blueberry, which is the fine cut of Night Sky from my Aisha Creations. And we're going to follow that Night Sky section with Blueberry, starting to just very carefully start to blend into my teal color as well as a little bit of that Mermazing and Ariella color that's on the other side. For this kind of blue streak, it's really it's really kind of, I just love the way that that one came out because it's almost like just like a streak of darkness in between all of those colors. The next one is vervain. Vervain is a finer cut of grapeful, and so we're going back over those purple sections. And with my finer cuts of color here, what I'm trying to do is move my cup back and forth so that I'm not only placing the color down and covering up what epoxy is over that section, but also blending it into the sections next to it to make the transition of color to color that much more seamless. That color that I went into last was Thick Tiff's cousin, Tiffany Who. So we went in with Tiffany Who. And then finally, we're going to go in with Disco Ball, which is a holographic silver, to cover up the gray sections here. So I loved this holographic silver because it really did give a great like pop of like metallic, if you will, across this, and was a great accent color to add. So while this is all finished, I've tapped off any excess glitter, making sure that I've gotten anything extra kind of removed off the cup. But while my cup is still wet and my epoxy is not yet cured, I am going to go ahead and take off this tape that is covering up my vinyl. You want to make sure that you do this right after you've done your epoxy glitter application or Mod Podge, because you don't want your cup to fully dry and then pull up the tape and have your glitter be removed as well. So after glitter and everything is dry, I did do two full coats of epoxy over the cup. And now we're going to move on to doing the Milky Way portion of this tumbler. So this cup is not fully smooth. It is still a little bit rough after my 2 coats of glitter, but we're going to go and do the Milky Way portion of this. That way we can get this this design really to just sort of come together. So I've mixed up about 30 ml of Flynn Sisters epoxy, and so I'm going to go over this with the entire cup with a layer of epoxy before I split those contents in that epoxy cup among 2 other medicine cups with different colorants we're going to use. So I use anywhere from probably about 10 ml or so on the cup. I don't want my epoxy to be too thick that I end up with a lot of movement. I want to be able to control the movement of the epoxy additives that we're going to be adding for the Milky Way swirl of this, and I won't have control if my initial coat is too thick. So keep your coats thin. With Flynn Sisters Premium Epoxy, I definitely only need like maybe 5 to 10 ml, definitely not a whole lot because this is a thicker viscosity epoxy. So you do want to make sure to be mindful about how much epoxy you're using in that first layer. So I've split the rest of that epoxy amongst 2 other cups. We're going to do white epoxy dye in 1 cup. We're going to do Moon Dust from my Asia Creations in the 2nd cup. And then in my 3rd and final cup, we're going to go with a mica powder. And we're using Lavender Luster from 4K Glitter, which is Vinyl Gallery's glitter and mica powder line. And we're adding a little bit of that to the 3rd medicine cup. So you guys have seen me do Milky Ways before, but I figured I'd walk you through this one as well, just because there are a couple other elements that I did here that are kind of important for you to see and may be helpful if you have not ever felt you're super strong at doing your Milky Way tumblers. So I've torched my cup to make sure I have removed any and all bubbles, and we're going to go ahead and mix all of those different colorants and additives into the medicine cups and get these ready to be applied. So I'm going to be applying this with a combination of my stir stick and using a silicone brush today, because that is also another great way to be able to apply your colorants in a Milky Way swirl without having to use your fingers if you feel like you're a little heavy-handed or your fingers maybe are a little bit too thick and kind of mess up what you're going with. So what I'm going to be doing first is I'm going to be focusing on the white colorant to put on my cup. And for this, what I want to do with this is I want to make the blend from vinyl to glitter look a little bit more cohesive to the design. And so I am lining the edges of my vinyl where vinyl meets glitter with my white epoxy dye, just kind of a thin strip if I can on these sections, because I want to be able to blow out or thin out this epoxy dye and kind of make the Milky Way focus from the leopard print vinyl outward. I'll then be able to put all the rest of my colorants in the glittered section, and I want to leave the section that is the vinyl exposed with little to no colorant over top of that if I can avoid it. So I'm going to stop my turner and I'm going to take over with my heat gun here, blowing my colorant, my white epoxy dye, kind of fanning it out with the heat gun and blowing it so that it moves outward from the vinyl and on toward the glitter sections. I'm then going to let that spin, and I'm going to remove anything that got a little bit too messy with my hands and just kind of put any extras just on a paper towel that I have set off to the side. That really just helps me kind of keep better control of how everything starts to flow. With these kinds of cups, you don't want to add too much colorant when you first start your first few lines, because it can get really muddled and move too fast, too quickly. And so depending on how you're applying your heat, whether it's, heat gun, or if maybe you're just dragging a silicone brush into it to kind of, make that movement. With heat, you want to also be very careful with how much heat you're applying, because the more heat is going to make your colorants sort of flow more. So less sort of colorants, less heat is really going to be your best friend when doing these. I then just went in with my next color there, which is my moon dust. So the moon dust wasn't showing up super vibrant and dark in these sections, so I went a little bit more heavy than I would have normally with a glitter mica base, if you will, when it comes to applying to a Milky Way swirl. But because we have some very dark colors on the backside of this cup, I wanted to make sure that this colorant was still very vibrant and showcases the beautifulness of the glitter that is moon dust. And so I decided to put a few extra sort of pieces or, strings of that glitter epoxy mixture into this cup to sort of bring out some of those other colors. So now I'm just using my silicone brush, which you could alternatively certainly use your finger or your gloved hand, and I'm just kind of going through and picking out anything that I just don't like. I've said this a lot of times before, but when you're working with a Milky Way or any sort of swirl tumbler where you're using colorants on top of glitter, it really is just playing with your design and the elements that you're putting on top of the cup and playing with it until you're satisfied. I have learned from my own experience that at some point I do have to kind of stop and walk away, because I can kind of get ahead of myself or kind of just let myself sit there for too long. And then before I know it, I've really more or less ruined the cup than actually done what I had set out to do. So, if you feel like you like it, or you're like, I don't know if I like it, especially if you're going to be using a regular setting epoxy, which of course is going to take anywhere from 8 to 12 hours to cure. This is why I utilize these longer epoxies versus my fast sets, because if for whatever reason I don't know if I'm satisfied, I can walk away, let the colorants do their thing, come back in 30 minutes to an hour, and if I'm still not satisfied, I can add a little bit more color if I want to. So that's why I like to use kind of longer setting epoxies. Now, of course, you have to think about the pot life of your epoxy, certainly, but for Flint Scissors epoxy, I have anywhere from 30 to 45 minutes to really work with it if I need to add just a little bit of extra colorant. So if I walk away for 20-25 minutes and then come back, I can still use that little bit of epoxy there to be able to add a little bit more colorant to my cup if I'm not necessarily satisfied with the look that I had before I walked away. But sometimes walking away is all that you need. So I definitely encourage you, if you are someone who just, you've done these before and you don't feel like they've ever come out, remember, less is more, then come back and see if you want to add more. So that is kind of it for the Milky Way swirl portion of this. We're now going to move into decals. So we, of course, are going to be adding a name to this. And so because this was part of a live in my Facebook group, I do something called You Name It, I Make It. And so this is something new that we've done in the group, actually inspired by Jessica Flynn over at Flynn Sisters Boutique, because she did something similar in her Patreon group, or her membership group. And so I decided to try this as a way to sort of expand my inspiration into other ideas other than things that I would normally think of for myself. So this is an opportunity for members in my group to either submit, inspiration pictures, to submit ideas, and I pick these randomly. So I put them in like a random comment generator, and then I choose that way. That way I'm not gravitating towards things that are sort of what I'm comfortable with doing, but really trying to stretch my creativity to do something different. So I have cut her name on both a navy blue vinyl as well as a Tech Wrap Craft vinyl. So you guys saw me use my Tech Wrap Craft vinyl in the last tutorial. And so it really has held up really well and done much better, their bubble-free chrome, than any chrome vinyl I have ever used before. So I definitely think that this is a vinyl that if you are someone who loves the chrome look but hates the struggle of working with a chrome or metallic vinyl, Tech Wrap Craft's bubble-free chrome vinyl is like the best best vinyl that is chrome that I have ever worked with. So what I did was I did an offset of her name. So this is the font Artsy. It's literally my favorite font. I feel like I say that all the time, but this is literally my favorite font. And so I did a very small offset around her name. I think it's 0.50 for the offset around her name. So the back is navy, and then the top portion is the violet purple Techcraft Crap vinyl that we're using for today. And I'm just going to line that up and layer that. And because the backing of this vinyl is clear, it makes it so much easier to layer vinyl, so you don't have to sort of struggle with getting everything lined up. So as soon as I have this sort of lined up correctly, we're going to go ahead and get her name applied to the cup. So this took me so long to figure out how I wanted to place her name on the cup. And I think it's because the way that I did the swirl is actually in the opposite direction of any swirl that I've ever done. I've always done swirls in sort of, I guess, what would be considered a clockwise look. And this one I did counterclockwise, and it threw me off so much when I was trying to figure out how to place her name on the cup, because I was like, something doesn't look right. Like, I couldn't figure out what was weird about it. And it was because I did my swirl in the opposite direction I've ever done it before. And so it really threw me off. So finally, I was able to get her name placed kind of smack dab in the center of the glittered and Milky Way section along the back. Wanted to leave that leopard print section kind of exposed. So we're just going to hinge method this, which is just to adhere one section and then cut that backing off and then adhere the rest of it to the cup. And so that is kind of it. After this, I did put this back on the turner for 2 full coats of epoxy so that it is cured, and it is now sitting and waiting to be sent to my group member. So before you do your 2 final coats of glitter, I do also want to mention that I do like to seal any of my metallic vinyls with polyacrylic, and this is totally up to you. You don't have to. You can also use clear spray paint as well, but it's sort of what I like to do to make sure that I don't get any issues with my final coats of epoxy, like lifting or bubbling of my vinyl. So that is it for today's video. I hope that you guys enjoyed today's tutorial. If you did, be sure to give this video a huge thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. And of course, feel free to join me in my Facebook group. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye!